Caleb, and welcome to SermonCraft. This is episode 2 of SermonCraft, and today we have Dr. Anna Carter Florence. She's a professor of homiletics at Columbia University in Georgia, and probably one of my favorite preachers out there. Today we are talking about what is the first work that I was introduced by her, which is Preaching as Testimony, focusing on attending to the text. We all know as preachers that one of the most important things you can do is to study the text well, but also to be excited about the text we're preaching. She gives practical tips and exercises to do that will help you develop a curiosity and an excitement about the text. Before we jump in, just one quick announcement about the Sermon Journal by SermonCraft. The Sermon Journal is a system for sermon preparation that helps you create consistently transformational, contextualized sermons for your congregation. It's something that I've been doing for several years, and is actually inspired by some of the people that we're talking to here in this podcast. If you'll jump onto our website and sign up for updates, you can get step 1 for free. I would love for you to try out the Sermon Journal. Let me know what you think about it and give me some feedback. But hey, let's jump into our conversation with Dr. Anna Carter. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We have Dr. Florence on the podcast with us to talk about her book, Preaching as Testimony, which was a huge influence in my sermon preparation and also just in the way I preach. But also we're going to talk about some of her new books and how she's built on that work over her whole career. So, hey, how are you?
I am great. Thanks so much for having me, Caleb. It's really good to be here.
For sure. So in Preaching as Testimony, the whole thing was that we should speak in a way that talks about how the text has influenced us. And one of the quotes that I just love out of there is, testimony is a way of preaching, a way of living out the preaching life that the church desperately needs for its own survival and its own identity. So do you still think preachers, and I would also say the congregation, struggle with this gap between where the text calls us and where we are?
Yeah, that's well put. It's a really good question. You know, I started thinking along these lines when I began teaching, because I have awesome students, as students are, and they had been in school a really long time, and they knew how to write a really good thesis statement. And so we would be reading a biblical text and getting ready to preach and stuff like that, and walking through the process, and they would put together an excellent thesis statement about a particular biblical text and what they wanted to do with it. And I'd say, okay, great, this looks great as a focus and a function. Do you believe it? And they'd say, not really. And I thought, okay, this is a problem. If I am going to be potentially training people who can preach what they don't believe because it makes sense, and because it, follows the educational process that they've been doing all their life of putting together a cogent argument, then this is something we need to address. The text really has to pass over their bodies and do something. So I began to kind of put in some different steps in the middle of our exegetical process of working with text that would make us have to grapple more with what this text is actually doing to us and what it is saying to us and what we're willing to say that we really believe. And the reason I think it's so important for the church is I'm sure you've had this experience, listening to preachers who you're pretty sure they don't believe what they're saying. Yeah. And listeners can hear that. And that's very tough. That is very tough. Well, so that's been part of what my work has been about, try to help reclaim some of those things.
And I would also say, and this was kind of what dawned on me as I read that book was, we can talk about the intricacies of Jewish culture in that period, or in the interesting tidbits of like history, and we can get lost in that, but we forget that it's more than just a historical document or a story that we're talking about. While it is a story, it's not a story meant to just be interesting. And that just really set me back because of what you're saying. Like, I could put together an interesting talk, but it's supposed to be a transformative talk. It's more than that. So
yeah, I mean, preaching is supposed to be, I think, sharing something we absolutely know in our guts about who God is in the world today. And that's something only a preacher can say in a particular way. We can go to we can have Bible studies and talk about all of the other sort of fun. I mean, I read the text all day long with people, and I think it's an amazing thing to do. But when you move into preaching, then you need to be willing to put yourself on the line in some way of, which is why the word testimony has been important to me, to testify that this is really why I think this document, this book, this word is important. Otherwise, there's just so much noise out there, and it needs to be something we think can make a difference in the lives of real people.
yeah. You may or may not know this about me, but I love to read. I also love to get some extra reading in by listening to audiobooks, and I don't count that as cheating. Dwell is an audio version of the Bible that you can listen to on the go. They also have devotionals, targeted reading plans, and a ton of other options. If you're struggling to find time to read scripture, try Dwell. Use the link in the episode description to sign up. Yeah, for sure. Well, one of the ways, or a few of the ways that you talked about how to let that text impact you and work into you and become your testimony, was really some super simple stuff, which I thought was so profound. Was, you said write it, pocket it, which means just like carry it around with you, memorize it, which we don't do after we get out of Bible school, and then underline it. And I've told so many people, like, I have been one of your biggest cheerleaders in telling people about these simple things. Like, I remember the look I got when I told one of my friends, you should just start writing out your text every single week. I was like, that's one thing I picked up in school that I've never stopped. And he's like, really? I just read it a couple of times. And I'm like, well, I don't know how to explain why this simple thing has such an impact, but it does. And I was just wondering, because I know you wrote that in 2007, right?
Yeah.
Would you add anything to those simple exercises?
All the time. I'm always adding to it. I think it's just as far as your imagination will take you. The big thing, Caleb, is whatever you can do that will slow you down.
Yeah.
I think, and also in some way have it pass over your body in a way that words normally don't. Now we're on screens all the time, right? And so that's one of the big reasons that I think writing it by hand in a big blank notebook with no lines can kind of arrest your attention in a different way and help you focus on things that you would have missed. It's all about slowing down enough to see something new. And so whatever that seems to be, for people, that it makes it a different kind of a thing, I think is important. I've been doing a lot with verbs, which is what led to the second book. And that was also a way to kind of slow down and get my students to focus. The way you become a good teacher is you do it terribly, and then you've got to think about a different way to do it. So I was trying to think of anything I could think of that would help my students slow down and fall in love with it again, fall in love with scripture again. Yeah. I think if we're reading and if we're bored by what we're reading, then we're not fully engaged.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to one of the questions that I get a lot when I talk about the writing it and all that stuff. And also as a as a preacher in the social media world, I get all these pushes about cut your sermon time in half with this system and do this and it'll be faster and all this kind of stuff. And it makes me, I don't want to say it's not appealing, but at the same time, what I've learned over the years is there is no shortcut. Like it just takes time. But it leads me to the question I always get asked, and I'm wondering how you answer is, well, how long does this stuff take?
It's such a great question, right? And I mean, sort of a subtext for that is that we all wish it took less time than it really ends up taking. I mean, when my students started asking me this, I would say, they would say, how long do I have to stay in the text, in the biblical text? How long do you want me to do that? And I would say, well, you just have to go in and find the place where it kills you and then raises you. And they would look at me like I was nuts. And there was a way in which I was being, a little facetious or overly dramatic, but there's a way in which I'm really not. I think we have to stay in the biblical text until we get to the point where we have to find the place where everything we think that the word is meeting is not being met. Let's see if I can say it differently. You're going to be able to edit some of this, I know, right?
Oh, sure.
I think that what I'm waiting for, and there's a moment you can't really know when it's going to happen, but the moment when it feels like what you're seeing in the biblical text about who God is addressing something that can't be addressed in any other way except with this particular text. That sounds like a big dramatic way to say it, but I think it's about the urgency of it. I think it's about realizing that you found deeply good news, which is not necessarily happy, but speaking into a deep longing, and that those insights are always going to take longer. And they should. We're bringing our people with us. We're bringing the listeners with us and speaking into what we hope is going to be the very deep stuff in their lives. You've probably heard it said, there's a little thing that says, for every minute you're in the pulpit, you spend about an hour of preparation. And sometimes I think it's more, and sometimes maybe not quite that much, but it's, I'm with you. I don't think it ever gets easier. No. And that's not about not knowing what preaching is or anything else. It's about that this process of being in dialogue with the text and with God and with your people just takes incredible energy.
Yeah. Well, I love in your second book, the Rehearsing Scripture, you really kind of frame the whole goal of that practice of rehearsing Scripture in community as trying to say something true. And like you said, I think about that in the sense of why is it so hard to say something true? But it's like, we we live in a world of lies. I mean, we live in a world that wants us to believe the lie. And it's kind of scary to me to think how hard it is to get to something true.
Yeah. And person to person, I mean, social media has a lot of wonderful things about it, but preaching is a really personal act of communication. And it needs to come from, I've already said it needs to come from deep places, but it also needs to be about ultimate things, This is not just about something that's vaguely interesting. These are about things that change the way we are with one another, that change our relationships, that change the way we live in the world. And ultimately, we believe the way we help to move and partner with God to bring about the realm of God. So these are about deep matters.
Yeah. So in rehearsing scripture, and I don't want to like imply that I know what you're thinking, but it seemed like you kind of took that soccer moment and you just kind of blew it up and like really just fleshed out everything that practice could be. And just for those who haven't read it, the soccer mom is read the text with other people and get their opinion essentially. But can you talk about, you'd already talked a little bit about the verbs. Give us like a quick synopsis of what that means, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Of the verb part or the rehearsing part?
Well, the whole, just give it to me in a nutshell, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, the Rehearsing Scripture, that book actually came about from my Lyman Beecher lectures on preaching at Yale. And what the invitation to do those lectures did is it made me think back, how did I learn to read texts this way? Why is it that I like to do these things, soccer mom it or write it out or all of this? And I thought, you know what, it really does go back to my days in theater. And it really does go back to that practice of rehearsing, which is always with other people, which is always about the given, which is the text of the play in front of you, and which is always about trying to, with these people that you're rehearsing with, find, I use them, you already mentioned it, the expression of finding something true that we can embody together, that we can present together, that we believe is at the heart of what this play is. Now, scripture is, for me, so much deeper than any script of a play. But I realized when I started, when I got to seminary, that was what I was trying to do, was replicate that practice. And that it wasn't as satisfying to be doing it alone in the library, that really it was something I wanted to do with other people. And that that metaphor of rehearsing, of just sort of suspending judgment and trying lots of different things, and then trusting that the community can recognize truth when we see it, so that, and when we hear it, so we can hear God's voice in some way, so that the process becomes about listening together. So that was really actually the meta. It was sort of a working backwards thing for me. And then I was able to kind of put together the pieces. Oh, that's why this has been something I've wanted to do, you know?
Yeah.
I think I was always looking for rehearsal partners. I just hadn't, landed on the metaphor yet.
Yeah. Well, you know, and so Dr. Jackson was the one who taught me how to do homiletics at Trevecca. And he's the one who introduced me to you. And one of the things he always challenged us to do was to work on our sermons with our church. And he used the example of, and I can't remember who made him do it, but one of his teachers made him write a sermon, but run it by his church before he did it. And anyway, long story short, he forced us to do the same thing. And it has become, again, it's become a thing that I do. Now, I don't do it week in and week out, but like I'll teach, like I'm teaching on Genesis right now. And what I'm doing is I'm mining for that sermon content that's going to come down the road. And I think that's one thing that we maybe miss, is that you're not necessarily rehearsing for this week. You might be rehearsing for in 3 months. Is that what you intended? Am I coming at that right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think anything we can be doing to be reading scripture with other people. And again, Caleb, it's because I have this awesome day job where I get to read scripture with students all the time. But here's what I noticed. I read a lot of the same texts with students. So every year, one of the first texts that we read in the preaching class is Mark 5. It's such an amazing chapter. And I have been teaching now 25 years at Columbia Seminary. I have been reading Mark 5 for 25 years, and a lot more than once a year. And there's always this little piece of me when we're about to do it again that kind of goes, okay, here we go, this familiar story. And every time, Caleb, every time, my mind is totally blown by how when you change the people in the room, you change the insights that are going to be lifted up.
Yeah.
Every single time I hear something I've never heard before. And it just, it just blows me away. So that for me is just like and it's like I'm never expecting it either. I mean, that's the sort of obtuseness of being human, is that even though I know this intellectually, I'm never quite prepared for it. And so why would we not have these practices of reading with as many people as we can? Because that's what's going to give us the gift of incredible new insight.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. I'm kind of hooked on it. And I get bored reading by myself.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you even say that. I had this as a question I was going to ask you later, but you talked about in the book how somebody brought up why are certain people allowed to speak and others aren't, and how as preachers, the speakers, we don't ever notice that. It's not something we key up on. And I wonder, is it, and you alluded to earlier about we're really kind of programmed to write papers and say things that we think our professors are going to be interested in. Why do we struggle to get past that? Is it the way we're educating ourselves? Is it maybe it's fear?
Maybe. I mean, it's such a great question, Caleb, and it's something theological educators think about all the time. Not every religious tradition, not every faith tradition requires people to go to seminary, but you're part of one, I'm part of one that does. And so that means that we're going to be bringing in a lot of things we've already done when we enter this paradigm of theological education. And the practices need to be different. We need to kind of shake loose. And the only way I know to do that is just to keep reminding the students and myself that this is not, we're not doing this for a grade. I don't give grades. I mean, I'll give a final grade, but we do our preaching classes pass fail because I want the students to get out of the mindset of trying to please me, of offering me what they think I want, because we've all been formed that way, public school systems in the US and other places. Instead, I want them to take a risk and feel what it's like to say something in the text that they believe needs to be said and that feels like a gift to give the people today, but that might be something that a little risky that they're trying, that might be new for them, that might be stretching them in a way, and not worry about failing. Yeah. So for me, I think I've been trying to think about what I provide in this kind of theological education as workshop space. I think there just needs to be that. And that's very different than entering a space where you're going to get a grade. Yeah. Well, I mean, I can say definitively, I teach, I do my Sunday morning sermon, and then I teach like a small group, like an all church type Bible study. And I've taken the rehearsing scripture approach to that small group. I do it a little different. But I think you give permission for that in your book, Make the Group Work, but it's interesting to see how many more people come to the text almost bold enough to ask questions now, where when I first started, everybody was so afraid to say anything. And finally, it's like, look, people have been asking questions of this book for a long time. It can handle it, So, but it's amazing to see what happens in their lives. I mean, this has just been such a gift for me in my teaching and in our church. So, wow, well, I love hearing you talk about that, because that says so much about you as a teacher and what you're opening up for people, what you're giving them permission to do, which is not to leave it to the experts, as if we who've had the privilege of theological education are experts, but to make it, again, the people's book. And you can be a great guide in that, but I just love that you are offering them, Caleb, a way to have it belong to them.
Yeah.
And to bring their questions. That's really countercultural right now. You know, we are part of a time in which a lot of our educational formation was about multiple choice and getting the right answer. And it's, and we're not very good as a culture, right? In the US cultures right now, we're not very good at disagreement. We're not very good at always suspending judgment. So to have these spaces in the church where people can practice listening to one another and saying what's really deeply important to them, even if it feels risky to say it out loud, to be vulnerable with one another, that's just an amazing gift.
No, well, it's like I said, it's scary for everybody. Like, I really think so. Like, it's even scary for me because it's like, what? And this sounds so. This is probably something that shouldn't be said, but it's almost like it's intimidating that they may come with a better insight than me.
I completely understand.
And it's like, because it's my job, like I'm supposed to be the one, and it's like, it happened to me this Sunday, like, and I'll be completely just vulnerable. Like the comment that was made was so much better than anything I brought to the table that night. But it was a beautiful moment. Like, you know, like I've been doing it long. I've done this method long enough to where I was like, kind of like what you're saying, like I was surprised, but also it's already happened. So it's not like,
I know. And, you know, good for you for seeing it as a gift, right? And not something. I get it. I mean, it can feel a little threatening when the roles shift.
Yeah.
But that's what we're wanting to do. And I guess the other thing I really think about, Caleb, is that everybody's life experience has been such that they are bringing something different. And there are people in our congregations, people we read scripture with, who've had such different life experiences that they are going to see something different that needs to be seen and said that I can't see always. You know, I say this in the book that I really do think scripture is this collection of scripts that God's given us to rehearse.
Yeah.
And not all of those are scripts that we've lived. Not all of those are scripts that we will live, but we may eventually. And when we get this chance to come around them together and rehearse them together, read them together, it's like creating this body of shared experience that we can draw on together.
I started using Logos when I was at school. It is a great tool for sermon prep and just for studying scripture. It has a ton of commentaries, Greek and Hebrew lexicons, courses, and so many other great resources. Logos will keep you from having to haul around all of your commentaries and other giant books, but it also helps you organize the resources themselves. Hit the link in the episode description for a special deal.
Yeah. So, and that's why I wanted to talk to you, is in this podcast series, talking about how to do sermon preparation better, which I know from my personal experience and talking to other pastors, it's a daunting thing to try to write a sermon every single week. And I think what you bring to the table and what you have shared with the community of pastors is that if the text is washing over you and transforming you, it's so much easier to say something about it if you're consistently doing that in a way that allows it to form you.
Well, one of the gifts I have, Caleb, is that preachers get to be my people. You know, these are my people. And I really believe that when you become a preacher, you take on another life partner, and that life partner is the text, the biblical text. And I've been married 36 years. My husband and I met the first day of seminary, actually. We're married between our second and third year. I know what long partnerships take, and I know that they require so much effort and so much care. And I think the same is true with our relationship with scripture.
No.
You know, what I yearn for is for preachers to have the same sense of joy and excitement and commitment. I mean, even romance, if you want to use that language. I think preaching is so much richer for the preacher when the preacher's in love with Scripture. Let me just put it that way.
And it does seem, I mean, especially in the modern culture, it does seem like there are some pastors who feel like it's almost like the Scripture and the text is almost just like a little bit of flavor, where no, it's the meal, like it's all of it.
I think it is. It's the bread, and the thing that's kind of brilliant about what preachers do is you get to preach from the very book that's supposed to nourish you.
Mm-hmm.
So to try to, but I'm not stupid about it. I've been married a really long time. I know that keeping relationships fresh and alive is not something you can ever put on autopilot. It's why we have these disciplines like date night. I mean, it's sometimes I actually feel, Caleb, like preachers who come to seminars who are out there and who are tired, and you can just see it, your heart goes out. They're exhausted. They've been giving everything they possibly have. And I feel sometimes like what I'm doing is marriage counseling between them and the text, to try to find a way to help them back together.
Yeah.
To find each other again in a way that will nourish them and not deplete them,
Absolutely. All right. So I've been asking everybody these last two questions. So I'm going to put you on, I'm going to see what you say. So we all know that life is real, and you have kids and you've been in this for a while, so you'll understand this. Crazy weeks happen, and you don't always get to be as diligent and disciplined in your prep. So the infamous, you've got time to do one thing to prep your sermon. What are you doing?
I'm going to verb it. I'm going to focus on the verbs. And, I guess, and this is a cheat, maybe, Caleb, but the one thing I would do is every down moment, whether it's in the shower, whether it's in the car, whether it's on a walk, I would be paying attention to the verbs in the text and trying to see where they take me. Yeah. I would focus my attention really hard on that one thing, that one practice, and then I would do it as often as possible and wait for the Spirit to move, That's what I would do. If I didn't do that, I would do the same thing by trying to talk with someone. It's often my spouse, for as many hours as possible. But people get tired of talking to us. Have you noticed that? They don't want to necessarily do that for as long as we have to give them. So I would probably come back to the verbs.
Nice. All right. And then the last one is, I'm trying to get better at writing conclusions. I think that is the hardest part of any sermon. So how do you write your conclusions?
I have no idea, Caleb. I mean, I think I know when they're done, when the sermon is done. I think there are a couple things that I try to keep in mind. I try not to wrap it up.
Yeah.
I try not to get repetitive. I try to leave room for the listener to kind of go to the next place where they need to go. I guess I'm trying to provide, you might even think of it as like a diving board, their own diving board, that where they're going to go. So those are things that I keep in mind. I try not to have the same form every week. You know how with some people you sort of get to know when they're about to conclude because they say something like, friends, da, 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 da. And you think, oh, I mean, the kids figure this out, right? Like, oh, that's their cue that they're about to stop. So I try not to do that, to be obvious. And I definitely don't, I keep reminding myself that it doesn't have to be a conclusion. It doesn't have to solve it. That dissonance can be okay. There are things that can be left unsaid. There are things that can be left unanswered. There, sometimes the questions we leave with are just as important as the insights that we bring. So I try to keep those kind of things in my head. Another way of saying it is that I remember this is not the way the world works, that we're doing a countercultural practice. we're leaving room for mystery.
That's really good. Well, thank you. All right. So I saw that you have a new book.
I do. It just came in the mail yesterday to me. They sent, okay, so this is what it is. It's A is for Alabaster. It's the subtitle is 52 Reflections on the Stories of Scripture. So what it is, Caleb, is it's an ABC to read. And that word is this big long word that means for every letter of the alphabet. It was a teaching tool for students, even in the ancient world. For every letter of the alphabet, the English alphabet, I picked an image or a character and wrote about it. Old and New Testament, so 26 letters, 52, reflections, small sermons. I modeled it after Frederick Buechner's lexicon books. Peculiar Treasures was something I read when I was young and loved, and he uses the ABC to reform. A is for this, B is for this, C is for this. And I thought at the time, even when I was a kid, I would kind of like to write a book like that one day. I love that form. And so that's what I did. And I tried to pick texts, biblical texts that I hadn't really worked with before, characters that were lesser known, maybe. And the real fun was figuring out who was going to get what letter, because everybody's name starts with J.
Yeah. Lots of M's, lots of J's.
There is, I did, you already know this, C is for Caleb in this book.
Nice.
In the Old Testament, because I have a son named Caleb, I have a son named Jonah, but he had to go with F is for fish.
Oh man, nice. Well, that's so cool. Well, Dr. Florence, thank you so much. I appreciate this. And like I said, if anybody is listening and you want to learn how to be more in love with the text, to restore your relationship, as she put it, take a look at her books and she will give you some great exercises to begin that restoration, or just to create curiosity in your life and in your preaching, which is going to take you so far. But thank you so much. Thanks for your contribution.
It's been such a privilege to be here, and thank you for this ministry that you're doing with this podcast. It's really amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Man, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Florence as much as I did. She is such a wealth of knowledge about how to engage with the text in creative ways, but also in inviting your congregation to engage in a creative, fun way as well. And it's not just fun and it's not just creative, it's transformational when people engage with the text. So I hope you are inspired. I hope you're excited about that, trying out some of those things. Go check out her books. I mean, I've read Rehearsing Scripture, which is one of our giveaway items, and Preaching as Testimony, both multiple times. I haven't gotten her new one yet. It's in the mail, but I would encourage anybody, take a look at her books. She is such a good writer and so gives you such practical ways to engage with the ideas that she presents. So I would encourage you, grab her books. But if you entered our drawing for this episode, you have a chance to win one. So today we are going to make our pick and announce the winner of our second giveaway for episode 2. And the winner is Josh Dewberry. Hey, Josh, we'll reach out to you and get you your stuff. But hey, I hope you'll join us next week. We have Dr. Dan Boone coming on. Dr. Boone is somebody that I've known for a long time. He was actually the president of Trevecca when I was there. And I'm really excited about that, to share that conversation with you guys. We'll see you next week.